Shabbat Shalom. In this week's Parshas Noach, of course, there's a great flood that we all know about. Noach and his family are saved on the ark. After the flood, Noach comes out, and the Torah tells us that the world will continue from Noach's children. Noach then plants a vineyard, he gets drunk, and the Torah tells us he is naked in his tent. His youngest son, Ham, comes in, sees his nakedness, tells the other two brothers cover him. Noach wakes up, and the Torah tells us Noach knew what Ham did to him, and he cursed Ham. And it's a little bit surprising, because we ourselves don't know what Ham did to him. In fact, it doesn't seem like he did anything. It just seems like he saw that his father was naked and told the brothers. What's the big deal? What do we mean, Vayeda Noach? Noach knew what Ham did and cursed him. What's going on here? So the Midrash, of course, tells us that this is much more than meets the eye, that actually Ham had sex with his father. There was incest right after the drunkenness, and that's what Noach realized. We have a similar story in two parshas hence. After another destruction of the world, Lot and his daughters think the world was destroyed, just like in the flood. And the daughters say to each other, we better get our father drunk because there's nobody to continue civilization from. And they too have incest with their father. But the difference is striking. The Noach story ends in degradation. But the Lot story ends in a certain way, in a very positive way. We know that eventually one of these children is Moab, and from Moab comes Ruth, and from Ruth comes King David and ultimately the Messiah. Why is it that, number one, destruction seems to lead to drunkenness, which leads to illicit sexuality? And why is it that in the story of Noach that's so negative, but in the story of Lot and his daughters, it ends up in the end being positive? I think the answer is that that both are cases of tremendous loss. And how does one deal with loss? One way to deal with loss is to numb oneself. Wine can, and certainly in the ancient world, plays that role. But another way is through doing the opposite, taking the loss and saying, instead, I'm going to create something new. And for Noach, the wine leads to a sense of the loss of self, a further loss, wanting to just become numb from the great loss of the universe, from the loss of all he knew. For the daughters of Lot, they use the same methodology, but they do it in order to be creative, in order to parlay that loss into something positive, to say, how can we fight against the loss, to, as Freud said, to tap into eros, to tap into our creative energy that can therefore be positive. This is a lesson for all of us. We live a life of loss. In fact, the famous psychoanalyst Otto Rank said that we all live with the crisis of birth. The moment we are born, we are separated from everything we know, separated from our mother, who we once were. We were part of her, and then we become separate. And the human being is forever trying to reclaim that which is lost, trying to find their way. There are different ways to do that. We can lose ourselves in the numbness of trying to avoid that pain of loss, or we can say, how can we parlay this into something creative? How can we utilize our desire to reconnect, our desire for wholeness? How can we take that power and transform it into the desire to be creative, the desire to make the world a better place, the desire to have children, the desire to be connected deeply to others, even though ultimately we know that life is temporary. Perhaps this is also a question for us. We live at a time of loss. So many have perished in this tragedy of the coronavirus. We have lost connection with many of our loved ones because we're far away. Perhaps we've lost much of our previous lives that we remember. And one way to deal with that is to create a further loss of self by wanting to numb the pain. But I think instead, the Torah asks us in this parsha to not do what Noach did, but rather to do what Lot's daughters did. That is, to figure out, how can we rebuild? How can we take the pain and the separation and say what that really is a desire for connection, a desire for something much, much bigger, whether it's connection to human beings or to God. and through that to say what's a positive step that we can take. Maybe we can add on an extra connection to a human being, an extra connection to God. We can learn some more Torah. We can do something we have never done that maybe now we have the space to do. There are ways perhaps to develop ourselves instead of losing ourselves. I want to wish everybody a wonderful Shabbat. This parsha of Noach, the story of the ark. May we all be protected like Noach was from the terrible waters that threaten on the outside. Shabbat Shalom.